Hey folks, Matt Easton here, Scholar Gladiator. So I've been talking about Spadroons and small swords over the last few years, but one assertion that I have made is that a Spadroon is a worse cutter than a sabre or a backsword and a worse thruster than a small sword. Now, is that actually true? Well, I would say yes, it is true. Okay, I'm going to give my conclusion at the beginning. And the reason for that is flexibility. The problem is that in keeping the Spadroon relatively light and nimble, you have to make the blade, as well as making it slightly broader to give it the cutting capacity, which makes it a Spadroon, because otherwise it would be a small sword. By widening the blade slightly so it has some cutting capacity, what you do is essentially you make the blade thinner in relation to its width, which makes it relatively flexible. In contrast, small swords, not always, but small swords, usually at this period anyway, are triangular section. So they have no ability to cut whatsoever, at least the triangular ones don't, although there is one exception which I'll show in a future video where that's not the case. But generally speaking, an equilateral triangle that's hollow ground, it has edges, but you can't really make the edges sharp. Okay, so is this still flexible? Yes, you can still flex this, but relatively speaking, it is stiffer. Okay, it's also lighter and more nimble, incidentally, as well. But I won't consider that because those are really things that are more to do with the fencing qualities of the weapon. What I really want to consider here is penetration. And I know that all of you folks out there watch my videos gagging for more penetration, so I'm going to give it to you, and I'm going to give it to you deep. And so what I'm talking about here is penetration of the small sword versus the Spadroon. And what we're going to look at is a completely non-scientific test of my old punch bag, which I have much abused and which is going to get thrown away soon because it's falling apart. And I'm going to show you stabbing with minimal force, minimal effort. I'm not going to perform a full lunge or anything like that. These are original antique swords, so I'm being careful with them. I'm just showing you the fact that one penetrates much more easily than the other. Let's go and have a look. So what we've got is a kind of vinyl surface and it's got a sort of fabric inside it. So it's not terribly resistant, but I suppose it's some kind of analogy to clothing, for example. First up, we're going to look at the Spadroon. As I say, I'm not going to perform a full lunge or anything like that. I'm just being very careful with the objects because I don't want to damage them at all. But I just want to demonstrate to you. I should mention sharpness as well. Now, very clearly, tip sharpness plays a part in this. Neither of these are particularly sharp, though it has to be said that the Spadroon is slightly sharper. Sorry, the small sword is slightly sharper than the Spadroon. Okay, so full disclosure there. But I'm not going to perform a full lunge, which should be performed by first extending the arm, and as the arm reaches full extension, then pushing with the rear leg. You can look up a lunge online or look at my sort of lesson videos as well. Okay, I'm simply going to do it by extending the arm. Okay, so first up, let's have a look at the Spadroon. So here we have the Spadroon. I'm going to stand with my back to you. There is my target. Okay, I'm simply going to extend the arm into it, and you have a look at what happens to the blade. Okay, so hopefully you can see there that we are getting some penetration. It's really only a centimetre or two of the tip, but the blade is flexing a lot pretty much every time I extend. And the reason for that is this is a flat, fullered blade, as it has to be to have a cutting edge. So it is very, very flexible, and naturally when it meets any kind of resistance, which you might meet on bone or you might meet on clothing or uniform, then it flexes, it wants to flex. Let's have a look at the small sword now. So same thing again, I'm going to stand with my back to you. Okay, so I'm going to be here, I'm just going to extend with the arm and put the point in. Have a look at how much the blade flexes, and then we'll also talk about depth of penetration as well in a minute. Okay, so hopefully you can see every single time it penetrates, okay, over and over again, multiple penetration, and it's with no effort. I'm not putting any extra effort in, I'm not putting the body in, I'm not lunging. That's just extending the arm, okay, and just extending the arm easily pushes that tip through the target. And a lot of that I will completely admit part of it is this is very slightly sharper than the Spadroon, but most of it, I strongly feel most of it is to do with stiffness. When you hit the target, you can't feel the wobble in this blade. Yes, it does flex, but you can't feel the wobble in it in the way that you can with the Spadroon, simply because it's triangular. Okay, it's a different section. It is triangular precisely for that reason, to ensure stiffness, exactly the same as a socket bayonet. I'm just going to have a look now at penetration, but simply with extension of the arm. I'm not putting a lunge in. Okay, so this is not very indicative of anything, but it's just so that you have an idea, because you're looking downrange, so it's very difficult for you to tell. Okay, so just from here, extending the arm, right. So just extending the arm gives that much penetration, okay, which is about 1.5 inches. Let's go again. And about 1 inch that time. Ooh, I missed. About 1 inch again. And a bit less that time. The target is inconsistent in terms of its density and so. Did you notice as well that against this one, the actual punch bag is being pushed away? Okay, and I think that's very interesting. No chance of that happening with the Spadroon. The Spadroon doesn't have enough stiffness in the blade to push anything, and that's one of the reasons it's not penetrating. So it's not only to do with sharpness, because if it was just sharpness, then the Spadroon would be pushing the punch bag in the same way that this is. But in fact, this is pushing and penetrating. So I think there we go, guys. I think it should be fairly obvious that a triangular blade is stiffer and does always therefore penetrate better than a flat blade does. And one of the problems with the Spadroon is not only is it flat, but it's narrow, so you're always going to have a very flexible blade. So in my view, even though this is a completely non-scientific and anecdotal test, hopefully that's been interesting, and I think you can see actually the difference isn't marginal. I don't think it's debatable. It's very, very clear. The small sword penetrates far better than a Spadroon does. So indeed, I think it stands up to my argument that the Spadroon is definitely worse at cutting than the sabre or the backsword, but it's also worse at penetrating than the small sword is generally. And I'll just add also the caveat, this is specifically the British 1796 Spadroon. Doesn't apply to all Spadroons. There are different designs, French designs. There are diamond section blades, and so double-edged, whereas this is single-edged. There's various different types, but anyway, this is based on the ones that I'm using. These are both British, both of the same period, both Napoleonic. Hope that's been interesting. Cheers, folks. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe. We have extra videos on Patreon, and you can follow us on Facebook.